Topuria has now vacated the 145-pound title. And man, this is actually some incredible news for the entire featherweight division, honestly. Because now they can rest easy knowing that the unstoppable force that was holding them back from acquiring 145-pound greatness has now vacated. But for the lightweights, you don't know what's coming because Ilia Topuria is on his way. Or also look, welcome back to the channel. And in today's video, we're going to be discussing what's next for the now former undisputed featherweight champion of the world, Ilia Topuria. And with the most recent news from Dana White that Ilia has now stepped down from his 145-pound throne, it's kinda got me wondering, what are the next steps for Ilia moving forward? And what does his future have in store? But with that being said, without further ado, let's get right in to the video. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share so you can help me reach 1,000 subscribers by May. I'll deeply appreciate you. And make sure you join the official UFC Discord, link in the description. Alright, so look, wow. Dana White has just recently flipped the entire MMA landscape upon itself with the most recent news he just dropped. And look, if you haven't heard the news already, Ilia Topuria, the undisputed 145-pound champion of the world, has just recently came out to say that from this point moving forward, will now be fighting in the lightweight division. Yup, you heard that right. Turns out that El Matador believes that he's done everything he can within the featherweight division, which, I mean, he ain't wrong about. Flatline two of the greatest men to ever grace his division back to back within a 7-month time span, all at the ripe young age of 27. I mean, when you're talking about an out-of-the-cut, bona fide global phenomenon, Ilia Topuria is kinda your guy. And so, in turn, he has officially vacated the UFC featherweight belt, but apparently he's also got some underlining weight-cutting issues as well. And so, the next time we'll be seeing El Matador in the octagon, it'll be at 155 pounds. And so, from what I've been seeing from these news analysts and a lot of these posts on social media, the UFC are reportedly working on setting up a fight between Islam Makhachev and Ilia Topuria this year, with the possibility of it happening as soon as International Fight Week in June being very likely. And look, I know I've already voiced my stance about this fight in a previous video before, so to make a long story short, I wasn't necessarily a fan of this Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev fight on further thought. I thought that first, the featherweight division hasn't yet been cleared out and there are still a number of contenders within it that could be fighting for the undisputed title as we speak, i.e. a Diego Lopez as well as a Movsar Evloev. I just thought that maybe before we start entertaining the idea of a move up off of a single title defense, let's first dispatch of these hungry, fresh contenders so then afterward, when it is time to move up, we wouldn't be in anyone's way and not holding up an entire division like others did in the past. But with this most recent announcement from Uncle Fester on IG Live, my worry about holding up a division seems to be a non-existent factor now, with Ilia Topuria now vacating from the 145-pound throne. And look, if this fight becomes a reality, it can go down as one of the most thrilling pre-fight buildups in all of UFC history. I mean, for instance, let's just consider Ilia Topuria's path. It would start off by knocking out Alexander Volkanovski in order to win the featherweight title, and then following it up with knocking out Max Blessed Holloway for your first ever title defense, and then immediately making the move up to the lightweight division in order to challenge Islam Makhachev, the reigning champion as well as the current #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. I mean, if this doesn't scream absolute marauder and bona fide freak of nature, then I don't know what does. So with all that being said, what's next for Ilia Topuria moving forward? And that also brings us back to why would Ilia Topuria vacate the belt? I mean, let's list it off. He's a dominant champion, quickly dispatched of 2 featherweight titans in under a year, and is only 28 years of age. Wouldn't the UFC want to pounce on this opportunity to market the possibility of their next golden boy becoming a simultaneous champ? Why take his belt away? And that's where we get into what Dan Hooker said on Submission Radio a few days ago, where he said, and I quote, "He's the guy that's been inactive. I know that Volk's been trying to fight Ilia, and the UFC's been trying to put the Ilia fight together for the longest time, and he continuously said that he can't make the weight. If his plan was to shift up and get the shot at the other title, and the UFC was the ones that wanted it to happen as well, then there's no way they'd strip him of the title before he went and contested. I think that they took it off of him as a bit of force, just to be like, brother, you fight when we tell you to fight. I think that's more of what's going on. I think it's a show of force from the UFC. And that's where I agree with Dan Hangman. I think the UFC is trying to make a statement to not only the entire MMA world, but to all the other champions as well, making an example out of El Matador. That he's not above the sport and making sure that he doesn't get to call any of the shots, similar to how the Notorious did way back when. And so you see, taking the belt away from him was probably a way to show authority, metaphorically putting their foot down by letting him know that he can't just do whatever he wants to. And the whole thing about him struggling to make 145, while I personally think it is true, might probably be a cover-up like Dan the Hangman said. And this kind of feels like more of the UFC forcing his move to 155, but only on their terms. They don't want another situation where a fighter gains too much leverage, since it didn't work out too well for them in the past. That's why I think the UFC isn't letting him slide right into the title shot against Islam Makhachev while also holding the belt off rip. And with the recent interview with Diego Lopez, it kind of just proves that fact. So instead, this is how I think the UFC are likely going to set up Ilia El Matador's move to 155. I think they're first going to make the Ilia Topuria versus Arman Tsarukyan matchup first. And look, let me break it down real quick. Even though Arman Tsarukyan is a top contender, the UFC probably aren't as thrilled about him ever since he pulled out against the Islam Makhachev fight on only 3-day short notice for UFC 311. Meanwhile, Islam Makhachev has stated to have zero interest in giving Ilia El Matador a title shot off rip, and so making the Ilia versus Arman fight is probably the best way to keep things in check, in my opinion. As for Dustin the Diamond Poirier, he has said on numerous occasions that his next fight is probably going to be his retirement bout, and he wants legends only. And so taking on Ilia El Matador, especially if he loses, wouldn't do anything for him legacy-wise. So I just personally think that that fight just doesn't make the most amount of sense. I also think that Charles Oliveira, Charles do Bronx is also off the table as well, considering that he's most likely next for Islam Makhachev, coming off of his most recent win over Michael Chandler in November of last year. Plus, not to mention, they were actually booked for a rematch before Charles got injured, so I just personally feel like a continuation of that storyline must be settled before even talking about an Ilia Topuria. And so in conclusion, the timeline looks like this. Islam versus Charles 2 happens first, and then Ilia Topuria takes on Arman Tsarukyan. And then the winners of those two fights, those most likely being Islam and Ilia, finally meeting in their inevitable super fight showdown. I personally think that this setup makes the most amount of sense for the UFC. It keeps Ilia El Matador from getting special treatment, and then it also sorts out any remaining loose ends within the lightweight division, ending it all off with the fight that we all want to see, that being Ilia El Matador Topuria versus Islam Makhachev. I think it's a win-win in my book, if you ask me. But That's all I've got to say for this video. Let me know in the comment section below, what are your guys' thoughts on what's next for Ilia Topuria after vacating his belt to go up to 155 pounds? Do you think he fights a contender first before going to Islam? Or are the UFC going to throw him into the lion's den against the #1 pound-for-pound king himself, Islam Makhachev, off rip? Let me know in the comment section below. But that about wraps up the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.